This is going to be a bit of an interesting video. I want to talk about some of my opinions about how I think the Necromancer has grown, how it has responded to the changes that Blizzard has put in place. Obviously, there's a big balance patch coming up, and I think a lot of things are probably already set in stone. But I wanted to touch on the Necromancer, because I think we really need to talk about something that is a little bit hard to quantify. So what I'm first going to do is I'm currently on the Infinimus build. Everybody loves the Infinimus build, right? We all love it. And I'm just going to be in this tier 45 dungeon, just kind of like playing the game a little bit, just kind of show you something. And then I think that we need to talk about it. So the basic concept of Infinimus is pretty simple. You stack a bunch of darkness skill damage abilities and proc abilities, and you're able to keep up permanent uptime on all your cooldowns because of Abhorrent Decrepify. And the fact that it can is actually like really cool. You need to put on a ton of lucky hits so that it's more consistent. The build has a lot of issues where it can't really deal with single targets. It's actually very well balanced. And in comparison to other classes, basically does nothing cool other than near permanently be immune to damage. It doesn't even really output that much DPS. It's a very slow and methodical build. It allows you to put a little bit of movement speed on the build. But here's the problem. Like, here's my issue with the Necromancer as a whole. If you remove any one of the skills from this skill bar, the build doesn't really function anymore, because they all need to work in concert, which you might say is a good thing. But there's one skill you cannot remove from this build no matter what, because this one skill defines the Necromancer. It doesn't seem obvious at first, but Decrepify might be one of the nuttiest skills in this game. Here's the other thing that you need to understand about what you were just looking at. If we were to go look at my skill tree, my skill tree is an Infinimus skill tree. Of course it is, I put in all the skill points. If you were to look at my weapon is an Infinimus weapon. My offhand is an Infinimus weapon. My necklace is an Infinimus necklace. And everything else that I'm wearing, including my entire Paragon tree, is actually just a Bone Spear Necromancer. I just took my Bone Spear Necromancer, redid my skill tree, and then put on the weapons in the necklace. That's why the damage output wasn't very impressive, but the build was fully functional. How can that possibly be true? When you're pushing high nightmare dungeons, just putting on weapons and an amulet could possibly make a Bone Spear Necromancer fully functional as an Infinimus Necromancer. And I think it's the issue of like constriction and design space in the Necromancer as a whole. Now, I want this to be very understood. The thing I'm looking for here is not nerfs. And in fact, luckily, they said a balance patch is already coming, and I'm more so hoping to just see some design ideology, some like approach to Necromancer balance and intentional design space to be more cohesive, intuitive, more interesting, and more widely available for what you can and cannot use on your Necromancer. And I want to use Ultimate Shadow as a phenomenal example of what I think exemplifies the complexity of Necromancer, while simultaneously pigeonholing it into needing to run the same 4 skills on just about every single build, or you are suboptimal. Those ones would be Blood Mist, Bone Storm, Corpse Tendrils, and basically Decrepify. You can fit these 4 skills onto every single build, and that build will be better and will be stronger because you've added them to it than they would have been without those 4 skills. Blood Mist is your only unstoppable option. It says that you are immune and unstoppable, meaning that you can also benefit from Ghostwalker, gaining additional movement speed while unstoppable. It also says that it can leave behind corpses, or that it can fortify you. And then if you add on different aspects, it can also apply shadow damage, which increases the rate that it fortifies. It can also tick your Shadow Blight, which is incredibly powerful. If your Blood Mist is now effectively a darkness skill that's generating you corpses and making you immune and unstoppable, and Decrepify can basically make it so that its cooldown reduction is non-existent, so you don't even have to put points into it, then you have an incredibly powerful skill. And if you put that Megazord together, you get that kit. That's cool. That's a very cool functional thing. The problem exacerbates when we start looking at something like Ultimate Shadow. And now my Bone Storm, which gives me damage reduction, it gives me critical strike chance, which is such an overly valuable skill, critical strike being one of the easiest ways to scale damage other than vulnerable, obviously. And now it also deals a ton of shadow damage within its area. So now I can proc Shadow Blight passive off of it a ton of times. And it also gives you access to arguably one of the most powerful defensive aspects in the game, which is Shielding Storm. Every time it hits any enemy within your radius, you get 5% of your base life as barrier, and it can barrier all the way up to 100% of your life. So while Bone Storm is active, you, for all intents and purposes, cannot die unless monsters are like 30 levels higher than you. And it just saves your life, while simultaneously giving you a ton of damage and damage potential with critical strike damage. Now, this skill slots into every single build, because every single Necromancer build, even a damage over time build, wants to have a ton of critical strike damage and critical strike chance, because Shadow Blight's proc can crit. So now it's like, okay, I need to run Blood Mist, and when Blood Mist is off of cooldown, I need to have Bone Storm. Bone Storm is also an amazing way for you to trigger abilities inside of your Paragon board, like Bone Graft, saying every single time you hit a target with a bone skill, you gain maximum essence and you deal more damage. Putting on Bone Storm in a pack of monsters means this is permanently up the entire time. So if I'm not using Bone Storm, my build is just suboptimal. It lacks survivability and it lacks damage potential. And then with Decrepify, it means that I basically have Bone Storm up the entire time. Again, a very cool package. By itself, a very cool package. That, when now put together with my Blood Mist, is making it so that I'm non-interactive. Then we talk about Corpse Tendrils. Corpse Tendrils is a very powerful ability. It's a pixel pull, which is already incredibly powerful. It gives you stunned and slow status onto monsters that it hits, and then it also applies vulnerable, which is really good. It's actually difficult to apply vulnerable on the Necromancer unless you are specifically a Bone Spear Necromancer. So giving you access to a long cooldown skill that gives you the ability to apply vulnerable is a huge benefit. Now, the thing that makes Corpse Tendrils even cooler is Grasping Veins. Grasping Veins is an amazingly powerful aspect. It says that just for casting Corpse Tendrils, you can gain up to 40% critical strike chance. If you put it not on a two-handed weapon, it's 20% critical strike chance. On top of that, it gives you 120% additional damage multiplier. This is how you see things like Bone Spirit and Bone Spear do these amazingly high damage crits. It's like part of that archetype. That's why it's so powerful. But even just tossing this onto a pair of gloves gains you 20% crit chance when you use Corpse Tendrils, as well as a 60% damage multiplier whenever you successfully crit. So it helps you to crit, and it gives you more crit damage as an overall multiplier. There's also a weird bug in the game right now where if you overpower while using this, it also multiplies your overpower by that additional damage. That probably shouldn't be happening, but it also means that Corpse Tendrils and this aspect is able to fit into every single Necromancer build, because every single Necromancer build would want to pixel pull, as well as apply stun and slow, and either apply vulnerable or generate blood orbs, which is one of the few ways that we're able to generate Fortify from our Paragon board using Blood Drinker. And then it also gives me this huge amount of crit and damage multiplier. A very cool package. And it's really nice to be able to say, okay, I'm going to use this offensive aspect. I'm going to be, I'm going to play intelligently. It helps me to stack crit on a very long cooldown skill that I otherwise wouldn't be able to get that crit. By itself, an incredibly cool package. When you add on Decrepify, you're able to permanently spam Corpse Tendrils. So you just permanently pixel pull everything that isn't a boss monster. Now, what do all three of these skills have in common? They apply a huge amount of survivability, damage potential, and they all have very long natural cooldowns, right? Big long cooldown on Bone Storm, big long cooldown on Blood Mist, big long cooldown on Corpse Tendrils. This is rank 8 Corpse Tendrils, and I would still have to wait close to 6 seconds before I could use it again. But when all of them are permanently up all of the time because of Decrepify, this means that this package right here, is the most powerful single addition that you can make to any build. And what that leaves is 2 skill slots for you to make other decisions with. There was a point where I was discussing with a couple different people how I felt about the Necromancer. And I feel like the Necromancer is incredibly deep and complex. Like a wildly complex character that if you're willing to sit down, read all the skills, look at all the Paragon nodes, and put together your build, you can get very good results out of it. Now, it's still just worse than most other classes, except for Bone Spear, kind of. But it's incredibly deep and complicated. And very, very narrow. Incredibly narrow. And what it's turned out is that most builds are just better with lucky hit procs on cooldown reductions to be able to make the skills that the Necromancer have good enough to actually warrant putting onto your skill bar. And every single build needs to fight including Blood Mist, Bone Storm, Corpse Tendrils, and Decrepify. People ask me all of the time, how do you feel about Iron Maiden? Iron Maiden says that you can actually gain essence from using it. It's a free essence battery. Not only that, Iron Maiden can heal you when you manage to kill the monsters. That's pretty cool. That's a pretty cool little thing. You throw on Temerity, you get the overhealing, you get your barrier. The only issue being that things like Temerity are a noob trap that actually get people stuck without enough survivability to actually be able to survive in Nightmare Dungeon pushing. And when you look again at Iron Maiden, you actually ask the question, why are you not using Decrepify? Well, Decrepify costs you essence, of course, so this is a free mana battery, and Decrepify isn't. Except Decrepify applies slow, and slow is a crowd control effect. So if you use Umbral, which says that you generate 4 essence whenever you apply slow to any targets, then it's literally free as long as you cast it on more than 2 targets. And if you cast it on 3 targets, you're getting more essence than you normally would. So do I want to cast Iron Maiden? That gets me slightly more essence in some scenarios, but with a cooldown. Or do I want to cast Decrepify, which is going to slow targets, reduce the damage that they deal, as well as allow me to reset all my cooldowns in exceptionally fast rates? Probably not, right? The moment that you look at Iron Maiden, understanding that you could be running Umbral, Decrepify is just strictly better. It just does more than Iron Maiden will ever do. The list of things that become completely invalidated the moment that you ask the question, should I put Blood Mist, Bone Storm, Corpse Tendrils, and Decrepify onto my build? It's upsetting to me. Because we can say there is a wide variety of Necromancer builds, but almost all of them use these things, or would be strictly better if they use these things. Now, you can always play suboptimally. This is not me trying to fun police. This is me actually just asking for people to consider the fact that with the current ability to put these 4 things onto any single build, the design space for the Necromancer becomes smaller and less able to flex and to scale with any changes that come to the game. When I first started playing the Infinimus build, it was great, it was awesome, it kind of solved all of the problems of the Necromancer. It gave them movement speed, it gave them survivability, it allowed them to output damage without being in danger, and I realized that there was very little reason for me to play other builds that weren't Infinimus. Why play a blood build that is just like permanently healing the whole time and isn't near permanently immune? If the purpose of the blood build is to be incredibly tanky, being immune is the tankiest that you can ever be. Everybody always asks me, when are you going to make a minion build? I already have a minion build. In fact, I have a Death Speaker Amulet Blood Surge minion build. It's just not currently written, but it's a really cool thing. It allows you to apply your overpower to all of your minions. And in reality, if you're going to run a minion build, you also need to be running the Ring of Mendeln. The Ring of Mendeln allows your minions to actually do AoE damage. But did you just catch on to what I said right there? My minion build with Death Speaker just allows me to apply my Blood Surge more effectively. The minions are really just carriers for the effect. And if you stop to think about Ring of Mendeln, how would you maximize the ability to use the ring? Well, you would probably stack a ton of lucky hit chance, right? So that you can proc the ring as often as possible. And if you're going to do that, you probably want to use an ability that hits a lot of targets and has a really high lucky hit chance modifier. At that point, what you're playing is a Bone Spear lucky hit build that applies Ring of Mendeln damage. Really, the damage of the Bone Spear doesn't matter, and the damage of your minions doesn't matter. It's the Ring of Mendeln is now proccing. And how would you support a Ring of Mendeln build? Well, you would probably want all of the monsters to be within a small area, so that you can make sure that all of the explosions are hitting as many targets as possible. You probably want to apply vulnerable, absolutely, right? So that you can increase the damage that they take. So you're gonna have to run Corpse Tendrils, that's an auto given. Well, how are you gonna survive when your minions can't really tank for you unless you're very specifically using the Bone Golem? Well, you're gonna need an out. And if you're gonna need an out, well, you might as well use Blood Mist. It's the best out that the Necromancer has. On top of that, if you've ever read Bone Storm also applies its ability onto your Golem. So now you can have a really high uptime on Bone Storm. It gets you additional crit, which your minions get 30% of, gets you damage reduction. It can also generate your barrier. So you're gonna run Bone Storm. So if I'm gonna use Corpse Tendrils, Bone Storm, and Blood Mist, I'm running out of spaces to even put the minions. So I probably can only use like one or the other minion. And now that's kind of a problem too. And if I really wanted this build to be as like effective as possible for me to benefit from as many things as possible, I would probably want Decrepify. It makes it so that my minions stay up longer. It gives me better survivability by decreasing damage and slowing monsters. It also reduces the cooldown on my really powerful abilities that keeps all the monsters in one space while my minions can focus it. Keeps up Bone Storm, which is like my AoE damage and my survivability, my barrier generator, and also means that my get out of jail free skill is up all of the time. So now I only have one spot, and I still need to be able to proc Lucky Hit to get my Ring of Mendeln to proc as often as possible. So I'll use one bit of summons, at least the skeletons, because I can get a ton of those, and I'll put Bone Spear here as my Lucky Hit generator. And what you've done is you've taken the most powerful engine that the Necromancer has, and you've maximized for Lucky Hit, so that your minion build can really just be a Ring of Mendeln proccing build to apply Ring of Mendeln AoE damage as often as possible. It goes even a little bit further. Here's the interesting part. When Deathspeaker's Amulet procs, when you use Blood Surge to proc it, every instance of Blood Surge from your minions can all proc Lucky Hit. Now, I don't know if that's intentional, but I did prove it. You can proc your Lucky Hit from the surges from the Deathspeaker Amulet. So if you don't want to go the Bone Spear route, which is a really good route because it applies vulnerable 100% of the time, but let's say you don't want to do that, say you want to be the tanky blood build, you have just enough space to be able to add on Blood Surge, just to proc Deathspeaker's Pendant, just to proc Ring of Mendeln, so that your minions actually do something. And by your minions, I mean the ring. This is very dour, it's very doom and gloom about the true diversity of builds on the Necromancer. Because there are a ton of ways that you can play this Necromancer. You can play Sever, you can play Blight, you can like do a hybrid where you're using Bone Spear but also your minions, but in reality that's just using Ring of Mendeln to get an added benefit out of your Bone Spear to get the procs off of it. You can go full blood, and full blood would love to be able to overpower more. There's not a lot that you can do about that, but you need to be able to generate enough essence. To be able to generate enough essence to keep it up all of the time, using minions is like a really good tool. So now you're using your minions, and your minions are able to help you generate enough corpses for stuff and also generate enough essence from the cold mages. And if you're going to be using them, you should probably be using the Ring of Mendeln. If you're going to use the Ring of Mendeln, you should probably use the Deathspeaker Amulet so that you can proc the Ring of Mendeln more often. The list goes on and on. I was playing Bone Spear Necromancer. I was using Bone Prison instead of Decrepify because I really liked that it reduced its cooldown from rapid ossification. I liked the ability to interact with the monsters in that way. And I was sitting there and I was like, I kind of have some essence issues. I would like to have Bone Storm up more often, but I can't really fit putting Fast Blood onto my build for the blood orbs. I don't even really have enough time to cast Corpse Tendrils for my running gun playstyle. And I realized that if I just put Decrepify on my build, I could put Umbral back on my build, and now I could reduce the cooldowns of Blood Mist and Bone Storm and Corpse Tendrils and basically permanently spam it and Bone Storm. Why would I ever not play that version of the build if I'm trying to be as efficient as possible and trying to push Nightmare Dungeons as fast as possible? I just wouldn't. I'm going to end up rambling for too long, and I just kind of want to reiterate the purpose of the video. I love the Necromancer. I think that the Necromancer is incredibly deep and complex. I think the Necromancer ends up doing 3 to 4 things, each one of them with just like slightly varying amounts of efficiency or difference in the playstyle. And my issue right now is I cannot imagine how they will possibly add power onto the Necromancer, add utility onto the Necromancer, or add skills onto the Necromancer that would ever compete with bare minimum these 4 skills right here for the amount of power and necessity that they have for maximizing the efficiency of the Necromancer. And I think that it ultimately vastly restricts the design space for the class, while also not making us overperform. That's the wild part. I know you've seen like an Uber Lilith kill on Bone Spear super fast, I get that. Remember, the Uber Lilith fight is in no way, shape, or form indicative of like the gameplay loop of Diablo 4. It's an Elden Ring boss with one-shot mechanics that you need to cheese or outperform. Literally just play better or just cheese or, you know, like stagger her like on the Sorceress and basically make it so you don't even engage with the fight. So you can get your cool mount, you can get your cool achievement. The Echo of Lilith fight has nothing to do with the actual video game. The core game loop and how much we enjoy it and how much we want to explore and experiment is wildly restricted right now. And it's not about nerfing these things or buffing other things. I think that there's like a core identity crisis for the Necromancer that I would really like to see the developers work to break it out of that shell. That's what I got for you. That's the fear that I currently have, or the issue that I currently have. You can call it whatever you want. I don't think anything here needs to be nerfed. That's not what I'm talking about at all. It's just how limited the design space is. And while you can do a lot of very cool things that are interesting, kind of play off of each other, ultimately, if you're trying to achieve in the game, which we're going to equate to being able to push the hardest content in the game or just be competitive in easier content, you really don't have that many options. And that's my main issue with the Necro right now. Sound off down in the comments. Let me know what you think. I really believe that there's an important conversation that needs to happen with the class in general. And obviously my voice is not the only voice that matters there. And I would really like to hear other people's opinions. Thank you very much for listening to this sob story. I didn't mean to be this dour, but I feel very strongly about this. But again, thank you so much. I appreciate it. And I look forward to seeing you in the next video.